We are live.
Good afternoon, everyone. This is the Vermont House Committee on Commerce and Economic Development. It is Tuesday, March 14th at 1:05. Actually, it's 1:09 in the afternoon. That clock is usually fast. Now it's 12. So this afternoon, we're here to start our discussions on the committee bill that David outlined for us this morning. And so we have Richard Amore from the Agency of Commerce here to talk about, I think, better places. So Richard, thank you for joining us this afternoon. Good to see you again.
Nice seeing you too, Chair Marcotte. Good to see you, fellow committee members as well.
So if you could just kind of walk us through the language and reasoning. There's not much there, but I think understand what you're thinking of.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'd be happy to, spend a few minutes giving an overview of the program if there's time for that.
Yeah, that'd be good.
And just a heads up, Gary Holloway is having internet problems and he may or may not be joining us. If he does not, I will cover that area as well.
Okay, very good.
But for the record, I'm Richard Amore with the Department of Housing and Community Development, Planning and Outreach Manager, as well as Better Places Program Manager. Would it be okay to share my screen just for a few things? I thought I'd be a good overview if I could just share our website and share some of the projects and the program overview.
Yep.
I do have a full presentation that could take 20 minutes, but I don't think you will need that at this point. But if you'd like, I'd be happy to share it as well.
I think we're good with a short version.
Okay, I'll give the executive summary. Bear with me 1 minute as I share screen. Is everyone seeing the Better Places website right now?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, great. Well, thank you all for having me over this afternoon. I appreciate the flexibility to be able to zoom in on this snowy day. As you all recall, back in the 2021 legislative session, this committee was instrumental, and we're grateful that the passage of the legislation to enable Better Places. The program was stood up in the fall of 2020, or partnerships were formed, vendors were procured in the fall of 2021, and then the program launched live in February of 2022. If you all recall, the program is about empowering Vermonters to create public spaces in our downtowns, village centers, and neighborhoods. It is an innovative kind of grant making program that uses crowd granting rather than traditional grant making, whereas it's a non-competitive grant program that supports any project in a community that creates, activates, or revitalizes or enhances a public gathering space, indoors or outside, that brings Vermonters together to socially connect, but also bring vibrancy and economic activity to our main streets. It's been going swimmingly well. The uptake since the launch has been amazing. I will share a quick overview of the program. We will provide this annual report, legislative report that's due on April 15th to the committee. We just wanted to give the updated numbers. These numbers are fresh as of today, but we need to update a few of the charts and the maps in here to reflect the changes because we did this back in December for the first year recap. But like I said, the program looks to activate and revitalize the public spaces. It's a non-competitive grant program that really supports grassroots, community-driven projects that empower Vermonters to create gathering spaces in their communities. And I just wanted to pull up this little snapshot here. Since 2022, when we launched the program in February, which blows my mind, we had 230 folks attend a live webinar for program launch. And then we had folks come right out of the gate and launch their first programs in March. We've had 21 local projects supported. If you recall, this program does require a crowdfunding element of the program, and community members donate and support the projects. The state will provide the 2-to-1 match to make the project a reality. It's non-competitive. The community raises the funds to support the projects. They will automatically get the state grant as long as it's creating a public gathering space in their community. So we've had 1,542 unique donors contribute to this campaign. These donors have been everything from a small child in Winooski giving $1 to larger, Main Street businesses or Rotary clubs giving several $1,000s to support these projects. We've had nearly $250,000 crowdfunded throughout the state. $456,000 have been matched by our 2-to-1 grant making, leveraging over nearly $650,000 in private investment. Our first 21 projects first 20 projects have been successful in meeting their crowdfunding goal. We have a live project right now, so that one's still in the works. But I'd love to show a few of these projects just to show the impact of the program and what is happening. And at a later time, I'd be happy to come in and do a 20 or 30-minute presentation really going into more depth. But we have a pretty interactive, dynamic website that talks about what the program is, provides a lot of resources. We created toolkits as well as other resources to make sure folks had the tools necessary. We don't all just provide these tools as paper hand copies. We've done multiple webinars since we've launched the program. We did one back in the fall, and then we did one last month as well. But we also have myself and Gary Holloway and our team supporting these local projects, but also folks from Patronicity, our crowdfunding vendor that we've procured to provide that crowdfunding coaching and one-on-one coaching and assistance to ensure they're marketing their campaigns and reaching out to community members to ensure project success. And that's why we're seeing a success rate of 100%, where average crowdfunding campaigns average anywhere from 25 to 35% success rates from like GoFundMe and others. This is more engaged and a lot of hand-holding to make sure these communities reach their crowdfunding goal to get the state grant to make the project happen. And we've supported all kinds of projects. One project right now that is live is in Roxbury. They're about over halfway their project goal. They're looking to enhance a village park. This is a village that's really small, 700 folks. Doesn't have a village green. They worked to procure some or acquire some land in the village, create a village green, and they're using the Better Places grant to add amenities to that public space, seating areas and landscaping, outdoor ping pong table for the youth to use. What's been really remarkable, and I'm sure your committee members would enjoy this, we've had some projects come out of the gate that were from our downtowns, communities of 3,000 to 5,000, 6,000 people. Not big towns by any means, but for Vermont, those kind of are big towns. But more recently, we've had some really small communities like Roxbury and then Berkshire. They're one of my highlights right now to really toot the horn on. They created a gathering area with a pizza oven many years ago at their town center in the part of the village. They needed a place of shelter for outdoor events, protect from the weather. So they're doing a timber frame pavilion. They raised over $20,000. They actually raised $28,000, $20,000 on this platform, and an additional $8,000 shortly after their campaign closed to get a $40,000 grant to support the construction of the pavilion that will be going up in June of this month. This is a town of 736 people. They had 108 donors contribute, raising over $28,000 to support this project. It's been pretty remarkable to see. A couple other projects just to highlight the diversity and types of projects that are happening. Another pavilion down in Guilford, Middlebury. They're doing a bike pump track. We're at the local elementary school to get the kids out on bikes and be physically active. In Matter River Valley, they're creating a dog park near the elementary school as well. In our bigger town, Burlington, they used the grant to activate the old Moran plant and add some amenities and programming to what they're calling now the Frame. In Barry, we supported a beautification during the holiday period this year. Other projects include community murals in Rutland, expanding the Village Green in Virgins. A lot of public art projects that came out of the gate because they were ready and they were more nimble and quicker to move than some of these larger construction projects like pavilions. So we're seeing a lot of public art. One I'd love to highlight is the High Street mural. They took an old, and I'll click on this really quickly. They took an old dilapidated retaining wall as a gateway into their downtown. And here's a picture of that you can see here, and created this mural. It was truly a community-driven process. They did a community charrette to engage the community on the design. They selected a couple local artists, and then they worked with some of this organization called Art Lords, which is an Afghanistan resettlement program that came to Brattleboro. And Art Lords is an artist collective from these refugees, and they empowered 5 of those to help support the mural, to paint the mural, and use some of the funds to actually pay the 2 local artists and these 5 Afghanistan artists, which was incredible to see. And it's been pretty remarkable to how they transformed this gateway into the Brattleboro, and they really did a robust engagement process. And what I'm seeing, and I just got an email a couple weeks ago from the folks in White River Junction who took an old vacant storefront and created this kind of media gathering media lab, working with their public access television station and the Center for Cartoon Studies to provide a place for youth and community members to use. And they do a lot of programming. The White River Indie Film Festival is coming there. But Samantha Dunn, the executive director of the space, reached out last week and just to share that they were also a pilot recipient when we piloted the grant program back in the beginning of COVID, where we used philanthropy dollars to support the proof of concept for the program. But she was just tooting the horn of version 2.0 with the crowdfunding, because it really engaged the community, broadened their audience and folks who knew what was going on in the project, and really got them connected to the project early on. And now they're coming in and supporting it and engaging and benefiting from the project more so than they ever would have if it was in a typical grant program where, you know, a couple people submit an application and not a lot of folks know about it. Because the crowdfunding is really all about community engagement and marketing of these projects and getting the community behind and supporting these projects. You can see a lot of these projects are really small. So, I mean, some of them are $20,000, which is our maximum grant allowed through the program, but a lot of them are in the $5,000 to $10,000 range. And that's one of the reasons we are coming in and asking for this change. There was a community cap, which was for good reason, to have in the program design and the legislation that allowed only 1 grant per community per calendar year. However, we are finding that somewhat being a little problematic, because some of these communities are coming in for a $5,000 or $10,000 grant, and they're getting that grant in January or February, and then another project is coming and reaching out to me in April or May, and they want to do a project in the summer or fall, and they can't. They got to wait till the whole next winter because somebody else in the community has already taken advantage of the program. So that's why we're asking to remove the cap. We are seeing broad geographic diversity across the state. You can see here, we have projects in the pipeline up in Newport. We've done projects in St. Johnsbury down to Guilford to Bennington and Lamoille County. So we are making sure the projects are happening across the state, but we would like some flexibility. And if we start to see it becoming an issue, we could add, as we've updated the program guidelines on an administrative side, to put the cap in. But I think it would allow quicker expending of these funds and a greater diversity of projects, and not stall projects that are ready. Like, I got 4 projects waiting, and I know it's a bigger community in Burlington because they just reached out and they're waiting for 4 projects. So they're going to be waiting until 2027 before they can launch their project. We got a couple projects in Brattleboro waiting. We got another project in Middlebury waiting as well. So that is the reason we're asking for this cap reduction or cap removal to be removed from statute. And to highlight some of these impacts of the projects, I just want to touch on a couple of things. We've done a lot of outreach working with the awardees and sharing the project, doing a lot of peer-to-peer learning to other communities so they understand the program and how it's benefited them. But one thing that's really been impactful in the St. Johnsbury project, and here's the one in Brattleboro as well, has been, Jillian Sawaki is the executive director of their downtown organization, and they've done a lot of programming, cultural events downtown, working with Catamount and others up there. But there's always been some fee charge. You have to pay to play, pay to participate in some of the events. And the Better Places Grant allowed a lot of these activities to be free and accessible to anyone. So a lot of folks in the housing downtown would come to some of these events, but wouldn't be able to participate. And specifically, one family member, one single mother came in to the events and said they just can't go to these events anymore because she's expected to buy things for her daughter. And so the day they started this first Final Fridays events last summer, she saw that woman and her daughter out there every event, every Final Friday of every month, and she was one of the last people there because through the Better Places Grant, there was opportunities for the children to participate without having to pay any kind of cost, listen to music, get their face painted, have some free ice cream, and really close that street and brought that vibrancy. And we really created places for people of all walks of life to share joy and celebration and connection to their hometown, their community in St. Johnsbury. It's been pretty remarkable to see. I could share a lot more. I could talk all day about this program, but I'm going to stop sharing screen and answer any questions about the projects, the program, and then specifically the change we're asking.
Questions? Emma?
Hi, Richard. Nice to see you again.
You too.
So I have a question, two questions. So can you just remind me, is there a limit for the grant application?
A limit? Can you
Sorry,
clarify?
if a project puts a grant application in for Better Places, is there a cap on how much? I don't use cap because you're asking to lift the cap and how many times they can be funded, but is there an actual grant limit of how much they can apply for per project?
Yes, the maximum grant is $40,000. So they would have to crowdfund $20,000 to get a $40,000 grant. Some of the pavilion projects, the bigger construction projects, are using that max grant to support their projects. The smallest grant we give is $5,000.
Got it. Okay. And then for this idea of limiting the cap on the number of grants that a municipality or town can apply for a community, the crowdsourcing element would still apply. So they'd have to go through another round of crowdsourcing in the same community for a second project in the same calendar year.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
It would be, but it's a different organization. Like in Burlington right now, in year 2022, they used the grant for the frame down at the Moran plant. But now I'm working
with my district. Yeah. The frame is in my district. Yeah. See it from my house.
And now this one may be in your district too. I'm working with Reverend Mark Hughes and his team at the Racial Justice Alliance and the Richard Kemp Center. And they're coming in to launch a campaign next month for the Richard Kemp Center to provide youth programming and equip their space to provide a place there for local youth to kind of really enhance their community center that they're building there. They're wanting to offer some places for youth to do homework. So they want some computers and some educational training. They want to offer a gathering place. So they're looking for like a ping pong table and some board games and just like seating in areas and really just kind of equip their space to really entertain and engage youth in the community.
That one's not in my district, but just reflection on this. So if it's smaller, so Burlington, I don't think is a good example of this because we're so large, for crowdsourcing is no big deal because we have so many people and to be able to kind of figure out the matching for another project, even if it was a full blown 40,000 ask and whatnot. But I'm thinking of smaller towns having to kind of do another lift in the same calendar year for crowdsourcing. And I'm just wondering if you reflected on that component of the program and how that is another barrier. It's another lift for that community to try to come up with, even if they have a really great idea in that same 12-month cycle.
Yeah, I agree. And I will say Burlington was the only project, the frame project was one of the only projects that actually made me anxious that they weren't going to meet their goal. So even though they're a bigger community.
A long history of anxiety. The name around plan is a long history of anxiety in Burlington.
The smaller towns have been the ones that have blown my mind and just really have stepped up and met their goal in quicker timelines than ever imagined. So there's closer knit community members and all that, I guess, in the small towns that really support that. But what we're seeing is, it's more than just one organization. Like some of these are municipally or nonprofitly run, but there's other organizations in the community that are chomping at the bits for the program. They understand the program design. They understand the crowdfunding, and they actually appreciate it because it's teaching them a skill to use for future fundraising, as well as broadening their reach and access to what the project is in the community. Because if it was like a traditional grant program at the state, many folks don't know about the project until maybe you get the grant and people start actually constructing it and they're like, where'd this come from, right? So it's really about kind of open and transparent communication. So I don't see it as a problem. I know some of these smaller projects like Berkshire, they've already thought about it, maybe not this year because they're working on constructing it, but how they could use the grant program next year as well. But the challenge is I see it in the middle tier communities like Brattleboro, Randolph, or some of the other ones that have reached out that, towns of 2,000 to 5,000 that are, local organizations that want to do something. And they've even in Burlington, I know it's bigger, but like the Kemp Center, they're only coming in for $5,000. So there won't be another project in Burlington until 2024. Middlebury wants to do a skate park right next to the pump track to kind of create the synergy of youth activity right there near the downtown. And they can't come back in to do that project until 2024 as well. So it's just like these projects are ready. They're going to find a way to do it. How can we make sure Better Places can support their vision and make it happen quicker?
Jonathan?
Go ahead.
Thank you, Richard. Jonathan Williams, Berry City. I understand that there's a 2-to-1 match here. Has any consideration been given to perhaps amending that ratio depending on the income, the average income of a community, or the population of a said community? I know sometimes that matching component can be a real hurdle for those areas, those communities, those municipalities that have perhaps half the median income of the surrounding area.
Yeah. So, originally the committee members who were on the committee a couple of years ago would probably remember some of these conversations, and we had a lot of conversation about the match. This program is modeled after a couple other state programs that do it, and their state programs are 1-to-1 match. So the communities actually raise 50% of the grant funds. We decided to dial that back to be more accessible to rural communities and change that to 2-to-1 with much community conversation or committee conversation and input a couple of years ago. And the program is really about being simple. There's no formal application. There's no paper application. We try to keep things really simple, and adding layers of complexity based on income or other indexes and stuff like, you're seeing with the rural capacity, but it adds a level of complexity that I don't think is needed for this program, because this program is meant to be geared to be really accessible for anybody to apply. And I think the past year showed proof of concept. Towns from 700 people to 40,000 people are using this program and not having one project fail to meet their goal. Because you don't have to be a community member. You don't have to be a municipality to donate. You can be a local business. You can be a second homeowner. We've seen donations from across the globe in these projects. It's been pretty remarkable.
Richard, if we lift, it's completely lifting the cap, right? Is the request to just remove that line entirely? So if there's no cap at all, is there capacity already to help every town that's been asking so far? And or if the cap lifts, say Burlington has 10 projects at once, and then a bunch of smaller towns, the competitive nature of a town that has capacity to keep doing a bunch of projects, competing with towns that can really only do 1 or 2 a year. Could you just speak to that a little bit?
Yeah. So removing the cap, there's 2 things that we would put as kind of guardrails. Good crowdfunding kind of best practices, especially in small towns. You don't want to run multiple campaigns at the same time, right? So there would never be allowed to have 2 campaigns going on in the community at the same time. That would be an administrative thing. We could put it in statute, I guess, but administratively, we wouldn't allow 2 campaigns to go on at the same time. However, when a community got their, ran a successful campaign for 60 days, 3 weeks later, they're getting their grant agreements, because we partner with the Vermont Community Foundation on this program to get that money out the door quickly, support these projects, rather than state grant agreements can take months. So once that grant agreement's out, we can allow another campaign in that community. That's kind of giving, in reality, at the most we could probably fund is 4 a year because of that kind of grant timeline. So we could put a cap of 4 in a year if the committee felt, more that was more appropriate. We thought it was just cleaner to keep it like that and have it administratively with the campaign. No, only 1 campaign per community, 1 campaign in a community at a time, 1 live campaign at a time.
Richard, what about communities competing against each other? One that has gotten 10 already and one town that hasn't gotten any because they're all that kind of thing. Can you just talk about cross community competition?
Yeah, we haven't seen that yet because we have enough money still, right?
Okay.
We've gone through about half the funding. We've allocated nearly $600,000. We have $200,000 in the pipeline, launching in the next couple months, or couple of weeks for some of those. So we still have, over $5,600,000 that we have to expend by June 30th, 2024. So I don't see the problem with the amount of funding we have available, given the uptake, we have. I do think, and we talked about this when we started the program, average 15 to 20 projects a year, just kind of the appetite for this kind of grant, niche kind of grant program. if we had less funding, I would definitely want to put those guardrails in.
Other questions? Heather?
It was along the line of Monique's question, but would you, if one community's having up to 4 a year, I'd like to have some cap on it, but I was thinking 3, but you know more. But the thing is what about reaching out to a lot of communities that have administrative capacity issues, to make sure they're aware of it so they can get involved? That's the other thing that concerns me about having no cap. And, you know, the map, there's a lot of other towns in the map. I know that we'd like to see more people get involved. That's all.
Yeah, and honestly, I would be okay with a cap at 3 or 4. It's that cap at 1 that's really created the problem. I think, and I think we'd want more than 2, because like somebody right now is going to have to wait maybe 8 to 10 months, or even 6 months, and that could stall momentum and traction in the community. So 3 or 4 would work if the committee felt more that was a better approach.
Yeah, I guess just remember that it's not just the municipality, but it's other organizations within that municipality. It could be a nonprofit that wants to spear this on, or a community group, or a business, so it's not just the municipality. But I was thinking, so we have a $40,000 cap. So if we said that no community can get more than $40,000 per year, doesn't matter if they have multiple applications or not, that we live with the cap. And if the community has 4 or 5 different projects that they want to get off the ground that year, and if they stay under that $40,000 cap, then they're good to go. That makes sense?
Yeah, but only concern I would have with that, Chair Marcotte, would be just given that we only have a year, basically a year left to spend the funds. I would hate that to create a barrier for us expending the funds by the end of the timeline before the sunset. And we do hope that this program will continue. And that there's some projects that are coming in, at $10,000 or $15,000 grant, and then there's another one that's coming in at a $40,000. So that would stall or potentially kill that project from happening. So I don't know if 40,000 is the right number, if we were going to put it. And then administratively, we'd have to track that, which would be, it's a lot easier to track the number of communities per year than the dollar amounts. But whatever the committee feels comfortable with, I mean, but I think that I would prefer more like 3 a year than playing with the dollar amount.
I think the conversation we had a couple of years ago when we created was, we want to make sure that the larger communities aren't sucking up all the funds.
Hey, you looked at me when you said
Well, I think that was your issue too.
Yeah, no, I know.
Is that, the communities that
I
have,
love you, Burlington.
the communities that have the ability to have more than one project and larger projects get to use up a substantial amount of the grant funding that's out there, leaving less for the smaller communities.
Right. Yeah, I understand that concern wholeheartedly. And it was kind of the part of the original conversations that we had a couple of years ago. But in practice, the ones that are coming through are more the smaller communities. I think the bigger communities, they're not going to go after this. A lot of them aren't going after this grant, especially in a municipality, because it's small peanuts, right? It's $20,000. They can figure other ways to do it rather than trying to engage their community in a conversation and crowdfunding. This tool has been a resource for those smaller communities, those organizations that want to do something and find a way that they can access this grant dollars. And what's been the incentive really is that 2-to-1 match, right? Like, it's really empowered these communities to take on challenges like Inversure that they never thought was possible. We were having conversations in Inversure like, oh, I don't know if we can do this. Should we go for $20,000? And like, we do a lot of coaching and support and marketing, and we do a statewide press release when they launch their campaign. We put it through a lot of different social and just really try to get exposure out there to make sure, these campaigns are successful, which they have been so far. And I hope to continue the success rate at 100% moving forward.
Ready? Jared?
I support Chair Markot's idea regarding possible financial limit as opposed to project limit. Because my issue regarding a strictly unlimited project limit right now is that, as mentioned by other members of this committee, is that even though the numbers may seem like small peanuts to larger communities, there is still that potential for it to be used in an unbalanced way. And by monitoring the actual monetary assets as opposed to number of projects, let's say a larger city wanted to run 3 projects, but they're within the monetary limit, and then a smaller community wants to run that one larger project, it's making sure that there's that equitable dispersion of funds among the projects. So you can still accomplish those multiple projects, and it'll take a little bit late work to manage it. But at the same time, it still maintains that level of equity between the larger communities and the smaller communities across the state. Or even vice versa, if a larger community wanted to run that one large project and they meet their financial cap, and then you have a smaller community that may have several less expensive projects, then those projects can all be taken care of without that chance of inequity coming up between the communities. Because that risk for inequity is my biggest concern, especially once word gets out regarding the program, saying, hey, there's no cap about it, and then areas with higher populations, they have more the ability to do that crowd fund matching. So that's just my perspective on it.
One thought I'd like the committee to reflect on, and I don't disagree with the cap because we really want to make sure this funds are equitably distributed across the state and our smaller communities can capitalize on the program. The only concern I have is if a community comes in, a small or big, because we've got a lot of the smaller communities are coming in for the larger grant amounts for these pavilions and other projects. But if they come in, say in January for a pavilion, they want a $40,000 grant. They successfully raised it like they did in Vershire. Now there's no other grant that can be supported in Vershire at all because they came in for the big one. The same thing like if Burlington came in for the frame last year. There's no other grant that can support that. So would the committee be open to like maybe changing that to $60,000? I don't know if 80 is where we want to go, or 100 or something, but so we could allow another project in the community if a community, because this is first come first serve program because it's non-competitive. But if a community came in for a bigger amount out of the gate and early in the year, we'd still be able to allow another project, even though if it was a smaller amount of funding.
Sure.
Do you by any chance happen to know how the current match from the state is appropriated for this project?
It is state general funds.
State general funds? Okay.
Yeah, out of Act 74 from the 2021 session.
But the appropriation's already been made.
Mhm.
Yeah.
So they're not asking for new money. It's just, it would be increasing the cap to appropriate the dollars that they already have.
Okay, so it's operating within the existing parameters, just a higher level.
Right.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, and if moving forward, and if there was the conversation of keeping the program existent, and I doubt we have a $1.5 million program moving forward, but if it was a smaller amount of funding on an annual basis, we'd have to think about some of these more caps to be more equitable. Right now, I'm not concerned, but we basically burn half the project in the first half the funding in the first year. I want to be sure we expend the rest of the funding before the sunset.
Right.
So if we create too many guardrails, we may create a problem where we have a couple $100,000 that we didn't spend.
Yeah.
And then that just delays projects. It's great to have money back in the state coffers, but what it really does at the local level is stops projects from happening to better the community.
Yeah. What do you?
I guess if I don't have any more questions, my feeling is that it's a short-term program, and if we wanted to set a number of what do you call it? A number of grants that a town could get, I would be okay with that. I don't know that if it makes it harder for them to track it by money, then it's a short-term program. If it's going to be ongoing long-term, then I would want to set.
I think it may be on.
Yeah.
This is kind of a pilot to see how it works.
Then I would want to set other parameters. I feel like that would be different, but I feel like for this program and to see how it works in this manner. It will help us to know what other parameters are necessary.
Yeah, and honestly, I think a cap of 2 or 3, if the committee felt, more, that was the best approach, that would be good, even if it was 2, honestly. Because if you put a cap at 40, the reality is you're only going to support 2 projects at most anyways.
Richard, I have a question about the money. Are you concerned that you're not going to get this money out the door in time? It seems like
No.
there's been a really big uptake. There's been a big uptake on these funds.
Yeah, I'm not concerned. I've reached out to other states that have programs like this, and their first years, they've said it was always the slowest year because it's just getting people exposed to this new kind of grant making. And the folks I've talked to in the other states, they're kind of blown away that we have 20 projects in our first year because they were doing more closer to like 10 or 12 projects their first year. They were also a 1-to-1 match, so it's a little bit different equation. But I do think we'll probably do another 20, 25 projects this year. And a lot of these projects are coming in at $5,000 or $10,000, grants. So, some of them are coming in at 20 or $40,000. But I think the cadence will be about 20, 25 projects, probably $700,000, $800,000 a year at most. So that's going to spend our funding. I don't think we're going to have a problem spending the funds, but if we put too many guardrails on it, we may.
So committee limit it to 3 projects?
3? And could we limit it to 60 or 80,000 per community
Well, I think,
versus 100 up to 120,000 for one community? I don't know. Or
The
is it
committee-
short term and it doesn't, I mean,
Where I was going.
no, I know.
maybe, so we've got this off the ground. We're getting some information back, we're getting data back of, communities that could use more help. Maybe this is the next step so let's allow them to do up to 3 projects. And the language, would say may award. Doesn't say they have to award, but they may award. So there may be projects that they don't want to award, up to the department. So maybe the next set of data that we get would say, well, we blew through a whole ton of money. Maybe we need to think about what that cap would be. So I think as we progress and get more information, we can adjust the statute and allow for things to happen or not happen. So I'm fine with 3 if the committee is.
Yeah.
Gary?
Now, is that $40,000 per project or $40,000 per community?
Up to.
It's a per project.
Oh, per project, right, okay.
Sorry, Mr. Chair, I'm a little confused because we heard that they have provided, or that communities have raised up to $20,000, but since it's a 2-to-1 match, wouldn't that mean it would be 60,000 total?
Well, the project,
Oh,
but the cap is 40 from the
Grant is
state,
40 this
right?
year.
grant is 40. So they raised more.
Right.
They're raising a third.
I see.
Grant, they would raise 60,000
Very good. Thank you.
or more, but the minimum for the match is 20,000.
Yeah, and in year 1, we've seen 6 projects out of the 21 reach or ask for the largest grant, raise 20 for the $40,000 grant. Most of them are falling in the $5,000 to $15,000 range. Because $20,000 in a small community, a lot of folks just think that's a big risk, right? Because if you don't reach your goal, you don't get the grant. So there's a risk there. So they don't want to take that risk in some communities. But some projects are bigger projects and they need the funding, like in Berkshire. So, but a lot of them are smaller scale projects, little enhancement projects, beautification, community gathering places that are, in the $5,000 to $10,000 crowdfunding for a $15,000 to $30,000 project. Or $15,000 to $30,000 grant, sorry.
I guess I'm thinking about this longer term and the data. I'll look over here because now I'm looking kind of at you. The data that you showed us was more about the crowdfunding and the money raised and the money spent in towns. And there wasn't a lot of data on how the town benefited overall for it. So for me, if we're looking at this down the road as a continuing program, I would want more data on how it benefited the community overall. So just want to plant that seed. I don't want to change this, but if you're looking at this as a longer term, it's economic development, or if it's beautification or whatever it is, I would just want that information.
And we are collecting some of that data. These projects are new, and we've only had about, I think, 5 or 6 projects actually complete their closeout, which provides, we asked for a closeout report with project impact, community, number of volunteers engaged, any economic activities, square footage activate, all those kind of data points. We don't have a lot of that because we're still collecting those. A lot of the projects were raised in the summer or fall. They're construction projects, so they're going to happen this spring or summer. So I think by next session, for sure, we'll have a lot more input and data. I will share with you in early April an updated impact report for a legislative report that's due on April 15th. I'll pull some of those nuggets from those first 5 or 6 closeout reports to share some of that, but it won't be a complete picture by any means until we get more projects actually on the ground. But some of the data points that I've seen, it's just been more anecdotal, qualitative, about just empowering the community engagement, getting more folks engaged and involved in these grassroots projects, broadening their donor base for nonprofits to expose them to other donors to support their mission moving forward. To the story I told in St. Johnsbury or in White River Junction, we are seeing 70 on average, over 76 donors per campaign. And so we're collecting the data right now that's easier on the campaign and crowdfunding and marketing side and engagement side. Later this year, we'll have more on the impact of the projects being built.
Sure. Might I recommend just one stipulation might be useful, since we seem to be unsure still regarding if it's going to just benefit larger communities or not. I would say that we review it a year from now to see how the removal of the current cap to the 3 cap actually translates in terms of its projects, and then review at that point in time and see where exactly those funds are being dispersed. So my concern is, especially if it does become a longer term program, that there's going to be an unequitable distribution of funds between larger and smaller communities in this state, which unfortunately historically does tend to happen with quite a few programs. And unfortunately, I don't see this being different. So it would give an opportunity to help these projects move forward, but at least also have the option of being able to collect that data, review that data, and see where the money is actually going for these projects, just to make sure the smaller communities that may not necessarily have the administrative resources to follow through with these projects at this point will at least have a fighting chance in the future.
Yeah, I think that's good. I think that's going to be done regardless, right? Like, because this is year 1. We've got these data points. Year 2, if we change this, we're going to see how that impacts the project diversity and the uptake in communities. And we'll have to come back to this committee next session if this program is going to live to see another day, to show it that kind of those data points and reflections, as well as inquire about additional funding to keep the program alive past the sunset.
All right, thank you.
Richard, I just want to let you know that I drove under the bridge of South Royalton, and that is the coolest project. I love it.
I know. I saw it a couple months ago. I went down to Worthy Burger, and it's beautiful.
It is so beautiful. It's just really so clever.
Thank you. That was like completely grassroots, community volunteer led. I mean, the town was the sponsoring agency, but it was really all local volunteers, and there was a lot of like, can we do this? Can we really do this? And they were so proud. It was just great to see.
Yeah.
All right, so we'll have David draft it so it's say not more than 3 projects per calendar year.
Great.
Okay.
Thank you all, committee members and Chair Marcotte. It'll be interesting to see the uptake this with this change, and see and share how that impacted the program delivery next session.
Okay.
And I will say again, I'd be happy to come in and share, and even have a couple local folks share more about the projects and the program if you have time later in the session. I know it's a busy time of year, but happy to come back in and share more. I can't talk more enough about this program.
Okay, great. Thank you. We certainly will do our best to get you in, because I think there's a lot of interest from us as well.
Great.
Do we have Gary?
We don't have Gary.
Okay, so you're gonna pinch hit for Gary?
I am going to pinch hit. I haven't been as keen and tuned in as much as Gary or Chris. And Chris sends his apologies for not being able to be here today. And also wanted to make sure we said thank you all, committee members and chair, for supporting our budget request. But these small changes for the downtown board and our designation programs are pretty small. One of them is just to be fair and equitable. The downtown board meets on average 8 to 9 times a year. During COVID, we've been doing more virtual and hybrid, but still a few meetings a year in person. I'd say every other one, so 5 or 6 meetings a year. And all other boards are not in the state, like our Advisory Historic Preservation Council, the Liquor Control Board. There's a long list, and I actually pulled it up before. The Emergency Board, the Veterans Board. They provide a per diem to the board members to be able to attend these board meetings. And pay for travel to get to those board meetings in Montpelier. Unfortunately, when the downtown board, they missed that. There was some oversight. And we're just asking to be fair and equal for these board members to be compensated fairly as any other board member would be across the state. So that's the first change on that.
So in discussions that we had this morning with our ledge counsel when we went through the bill, he understands that there's already a catch-all in statute that allows for that to happen now. And that even though it's not named, there's a place in the statute that allows for those per diems and those expenses to be paid.
Okay.
He's double checking on it, but we may not need to put this in, and it's probably been there right along where they could have applied for that remuneration.
Okay, so it doesn't have to be listed in section 32 to be actually qualified for the per diem?
It didn't sound like it, but we're going to double check it.
Okay, if that's the case, that will work. If the change needs to be made, the language you provided in the bill, is appropriate and just seems like the right thing to do. I know, half the board members are appointees, but there are half of them that aren't. They're representing different organizations, individuals, business community that, come up from Bennington, and that's just a lot of time and gas money these days to get up here for a board meeting.
Yeah, my understanding is that if they're not being compensated by whoever they're representing, then that money would be available to them. So.
Okay.
But we'll find out more, and if we need to make the change, we will. If not, we'll take it out and we'll let you know.
Okay. Sounds good. Thank you, Chair Marcotte, and let us know if there's any information you need from us. And then the other changes are, since we are meeting 8 to 9 times a year as a downtown board, we're asking some changes on the timeline from when we receive applications. Because if we're not meeting for the next month, the 45-day window as currently stands doesn't allow that flexibility. And some board meetings, we will meet in January, but not meet till March again, and it's 60 days. So we're asking a small language change, say 45 days for up to the next board meeting. And the language you have in the bill looks appropriate for that, and that's the reason we're asking for the Village Center, Newtown Center, and Neighborhood Development Downtown Designation programs. Any questions on that? It's pretty straightforward.
So is it, with the language that's there now, is that forcing the downtown board to meet earlier than they normally would?
Yeah, sometimes it is, or we have to meet. Yeah, we have to meet earlier because we meet. Historically, the intent was the board was going to meet 12 months. But sometimes there's nothing on the agenda, or there's not a quorum. It's really hard to get a quorum in August or December because it's the fourth Monday of the month. Fourth Monday of May is Memorial Day. So there's a few months that we don't meet on an annual basis, and that's where that flex. And there's nothing pressing. They're not going to miss out on any opportunity, and we talk to them, and they're okay with waiting a month, but that's not a standard practice because it's not state statute. So
Right.
I'm just trying to clean up the practice that, and since we're only meeting 8 to 9 months out of the year.
Okay. Questions? Okay, that seems pretty straightforward. Any other questions for Richard while he's here? Any other changes? I don't see any. Okay, I think we're good.
Great. Well, I was going to say thank you all. Great to see you, Chair Marcotte and committee members. Appreciate all your support for the work we do in partnership with you all. We couldn't do it, so thank you very much. Reach out anytime if we can help you in the State House, but more importantly, your folks in your community. Love to show up and help them as much as we can.
Thank you very much.
Great. Have a good afternoon.
Thank you.
Thanks.
So, Commissioner,
Hello?
in person,
Yeah.
thanks for coming over in the snowstorm.
Yeah.
Good afternoon, everybody.
Good afternoon.
Good to be here. I just saw this morning, so I don't have a whole prepared, but I'm assuming you want me to go through the parts that pertain to our,
Yes,
Yes, is that
the
fair?
rural industry development
rural, right,
program.
okay. Oh, I think I did have it open. Okay. So, I mean, perhaps the purpose should be, sorry, I should state myself, right, Joan Goldstein, Commissioner, Department of Economic Development. I always get right into it. The purpose of the Rural Industry Development Grant Program, I think perhaps it does leave a lot to be desired from the first opening paragraph. I mean, really the purpose is to get sites ready. Some states call these site readiness funds, right? So it's to make sure that we have enough sites that are ready for industrial development or industrial occupancy. And the impetus for this was as we go to Canada and we talk to Canadian institutions that want to locate in the United States, they want to locate in Vermont, they give us their specifications and we're like, we have pretty slim pickings. I mean, there are some exceptions. Bennington is one that has significant industrial space available, but generally around Franklin County, even in the Northeast Kingdom, as well as Brattleboro, not so much for the Canadians, but Brattleboro for the existing businesses that are growing. There seemed to be a lack of inventory. So we thought, how do we do something about that? The state doesn't want to own necessarily additional property, but we have this whole network of regional development corporations who already work with VITA when they want to do an industrial development. But typically that's when a tenant is already located. And then when the tenant is located, that's great, as long as that tenant wants to wait for it to be developed. So the idea behind this is to say, let's not wait. Because as we know, we have a robust permitting, we have a short construction season, all these things could lead to a longer lead time to get the building developed. So the idea here is to develop a small fund where we could grant funds to the RDCs who are either going to buy property, develop that property, bring infrastructure to that property, or build on that property and need that 10% down payment, which is what they would need in order to do a VITA sub 3. So that's just kind of the overarching, like that's where it came from. This is what we're trying to do. And the way it's spelled out here pretty much talks about how we would contemplate this. We would create a grant program. RDCs would come to us and tell us about a particular situation, site that they'd like to get ready. And they would explain what's available in their current market. Like Brattleboro is a great example of some existing businesses that have growth plans, and it's really a juggling act to figure out how do we get them situated. So they'll have to prove that. They would have to come in and say, look, there's a lack of space. This is what we want to do. Not every RDC is going to want to take us up on it. Some may not or not interested in property development. Some are very capable in it. Some have a good track record in it. You know, their board would have to resolve to do this. We would have to see that they have sufficient wherewithal, capability to do it. But the idea would be, it would be a grant program. And then once they get this up and running, they get the thing developed, whenever they sell it, a lot of times they're transitional property owners, so they would sell it. When they sell that property, the state wants that money back so that we could fund a special fund where we could then do it again and again, because our initial ask is 10 million. But it would be great to have this as a revolving sort of fund where as they sell properties, the state gets back its portion. They could either sell or maybe refinance, whatever the case may be. But when it's fully fitted up with tenants, then they don't need the state's necessary intervention. But we want to catalyze this so that we have industrial development sites. State has a fair amount of vacant retail. We have some vacant office, but we really don't have much vacant industrial space.
Okay, so generally grants go to somebody and we don't get the money back. So
Right.
maybe we want to call this a revolving loan fund, not a grant.
Yeah, it's hard to call it a loan because
If they're going to pay it back.
well, it's contingent upon if they sell or there's some other refinancing, but we're not requiring that necessarily. So that's the difference. I think of a loan where there's a term, a set repayment, interest. So this is really more of a grant program, that it's a grant, but we have deed restrictions. And when they sell property, we need to get paid out so that we could then do this again and again without having to come back for additional appropriations.
I mean, I like that idea. It's just, at some point, if an RDC has an industrial park and then they turn around and sell the building, that's when you want to recoup the state's investment.
Yeah.
So up until that point, then they don't have to pay it back and they're not being charged interest.
It's a grant. Yeah, it's a grant
I
to,
think it's still a no interest revolving loan fund. And that the only, they have to pay it back if they sell or refinance property.
right. So this way, because usually a loan has a term, either years, interest rate.
But if it's a revolving loan fund, I guess it knows they have terms of 30 years or they can be re-upped again if they have to be.
Yeah, I guess our thinking, and this is just initial, but our thinking was that we didn't want to be a loan. If it's a loan, we would probably have Vita do it, right? So that we thought this would be a grant program so that we don't have to just relegate this to lending. We're not set up to do loans.
How do we do that? How does CDBG grants that?
Yeah, CDBG.
Those can turn into revolving loans.
They could what happens with CDBG is they subgrant it to a town, and then the town ends up doing the loan processing with the for-profit entity. So, and in CDBG, in some cases, they also do a deed restriction, even if it's a grant, they do a deed restriction. So it sort of follows uniform guidance. And so whenever there's a change, they're entitled to the money back, so.
Sit down with David and.
Right, was there?
Best way to, well, David was, he
Right,
went through this morning, he says this looks more like an equity position in a piece of property than a grant.
it would be if we were enjoying any upside, but it's really just about getting that grant funding back. Like EDA does this when they do grants and you use it for a particular facility or construction. There are conditions on that money that if it's sold, this government has to get paid back. I think they put a term on it though. I think it's 20 years. I don't know particularly, but I know there are some restrictions. But we thought, since this is the first time that we're doing this, we would like to not consider it a loan, but put that restriction in, get some of that money back so that we can continue to have this, typically.
There's a right at the tail end of that, of section G, that may require the payment percentage of the sales profit. So I think that's where, David was looking at it.
Says may, right?
Right.
Yeah. Guess keeping all of our options open.
Okay. Questions?
Joan, is it, this, when I was reading through this, it sort of reminded me of the setting up of the town-owned industrial parks. Is that, were they done similarly to this?
It's similar, so.
Well, I think that was like 30 years ago that they were doing those.
Exactly, like I think the origin of the sub-3 in Vita's statute was to create industrial parks, or at least industrial facilities.
Right.
They've since expanded it to be not just industrial, like it could be commercial, what have you. But it is very much taken after that type of initiative. It's really about spurring industrial development. It's not necessarily for towns, but by utilizing the local development corporation to do it. But it's very, it is that is the end goal. What is the end goal? The end goal is so that when a company comes to us and says, well, I could grow in Vermont or I can grow in Plattsburgh. Plattsburgh has a building for me. And we're like, we could build one for you and it's going to take 3 years, what have you. This is like, let's build up our inventory so that we're not in that position, so that we have things at the ready. So it's a bit more speculative than having the tenant already lined up. But what we did in order to come up with this idea is we accumulated the demand from the RDCs. I know that you'll hear from them like momentarily, what they're seeing in their own region in terms of business growth for space, as well as some of the Canadians that we've been talking to about their timeline for when they want to come here and what their requirements are. So it was really about, okay, let's look at this demand curve. Let's look at our available space. We may be caught short. And we're not the only ones. Like I went to an economic development commissioner gathering and all these other economic development commissioners talk about the same thing, only it's on a grander scale. They're talking about, 1,000-acre sites, but they have site readiness ideas and they're a little bit different. Some of them, the state owns the property. It's like, I don't think we want to do that. We want to utilize the regional development network because they're set up to do that.
So again, when I was reading this, I was thinking about this need by the Canadian businesses to get a foothold in Vermont. So, right, if we're thinking, we know that they have it immediately a need, and is this going to be mostly for how far south in Vermont?
It could go south. It's not just for Canadians, so it's twofold. The Canadian is one thing that got us thinking along this line when we hear about the competition and who all has ready sites. However, in Brattleboro, as a great example, and hopefully Adam will talk to this, it's existing businesses that are growing. That they could go to Massachusetts, they could go to New Hampshire. There's a real dearth of available industrial space. So it's really for both. It's to accommodate our existing growth, which is really the predominant, when you look at veggie and all the people who use veggie, it's really the existing businesses in Vermont. It's rarely the outside businesses coming in.
So in terms of the way this program operates, so I would say it's more of a industrial award with a repayment contingency.
I think that's a good way to put it, yeah.
Okay, so just to kind of put it in layman's terms. One thing I'm curious about, especially if this award provision were to go through, so let's say a business ends up getting this award with the repayment provision, they get this industrial property. Now, are there mechanisms in place in case something were to happen to the property, such as a total loss, that the business pays back the state to make sure the state doesn't lose its initial investment?
Yeah, so I think it's not the business. We would be granting to the Regional Development Corporation. But typically at a closing, there would have to be sufficient insurance and, the state would have to be named as one of the lost payees, right?
Okay, perfect.
So, I think that would be as part of the restrictions, part of the contingencies, like we want to get paid back.
Perfect.
Yeah,
that was one of the things I was thinking about, and I'm thinking, okay, this is great, but something happens to a building and all of a sudden that asset no longer exists.
Right.
What happens to the money? So
Right.
I definitely appreciate that. Thank you.
Commissioner, if the RDCs, they are considered instruments of the state, and so my confusion lies in if they had purchased the property, would the municipality wherein the property is situated be collecting any sort of taxes on that property, or would there be a payment in lieu of taxes provision, or what is?
Oh, yeah, they pay taxes on their properties. They're not a state entity per se. They're a independent nonprofit. And like, I know just in my past, when we owned buildings, absolutely, we had to pay real estate tax. There was no payment in lieu.
Okay.
You know, in some municipalities, depending on the deal, they may want to do something with abatement or stabilization, but, you know,
Okay.
we don't tell anybody to do any particular stabilization. It's really going to be up to that individual deal.
I see. My confusion lay in they're being described as satellites of the department.
Well, yeah, it's interesting. I mean, happens all over state government. State government can't do everything, so they work through a lot of nonprofits. You'll see it in everywhere, AHS, like so many spots throughout state government,
Okay.
rather than just having a state government office in all of those locales.
Sure, I just didn't want, if the property didn't end up being purchased by a for-profit entity, I didn't want the local government to be left hanging, as it were.
Right. No. They definitely, that's part of and when I think about this, the object of the game with all of this, all of our asks really have to do with enhancing valuations, right? Like if they build an industrial property, that's great. We could put the customer, they could put the business in there. He's hiring people. The assessment of that property goes up. The town stands to gain. The state stands to gain. It all kind of fits in. Same thing on the brownfields revitalization. So I didn't see this in here, but do you have brownfields in this particular? Sorry. Okay. We'll talk about that in a minute.
Working with energy and.
Energy and the environment, right? Okay. Because I testified there.
Find out where there's some changes, the site versus project.
Right.
And the 200 to 500,000.
Yes.
I need to make sure that's where they want this to be done.
To be, okay.
I know they made the recommendation in their letter to appropriations.
Yes.
We're just double checking and
Okay.
then we have a placeholder in here.
Okay.
Edie?
Sorry, you were gonna.
Yeah, so I'm stuck on a couple of things, and I know a lot of it is because I don't understand the RDCs and how they work all that well. But a couple of things that you said make me wonder if there's another, I don't know, broader way to do this maybe? Because one of the things that you said was some RDCs have the capacity to use this well and some don't. And we're really restricting this to supporting them, and there are towns in the state that have the capacity to do this also, right? Or cities, right, that could prepare buildings and do this kind of thing in their area. And so I'm just wondering, is this the best way forward? And I'm truly spitballing, like I don't understand the system well enough.
Right.
But when you mention VITA, and that's a different kind of a program that would be a revolving loan, and then would it be broader? And would that be a way that we could actually make this more robust? And so that's kind of if that's really what we need in the state, is this too restrictive? So that's, and again, just.
So one way to, I recognize there are some economic development entities out of particular towns. It's typically larger towns that have the economic development entity, and the beauty of the RDC network is that it's all over the state. It isn't just large towns. Every region has some sort of regional development corporation, and they're set up as a nonprofit, right? Towns already have mechanisms, like we have some grant programs where towns could be the applicant, and we have NBRC where the town could be the applicant, the CDBG, the town could be the applicant. So we thought not to include the towns on this one just because we really want this to be property development folks who want to own property. I don't know if municipalities want to continue to own property. Like, I don't necessarily see them in that role, but
if there's some RDCs that don't have the capacity to do this, are we limiting the development in those areas, knowing that in advance, right? Like that's just where my brain was with this.
Yeah, I mean, I think the point is that, you know, if there is a town that has, like, I'm thinking about Randolph as an example. I know they have a local development corporation, separate and distinct from Green Mountain Economic Development. They would be eligible under this. I think we use the definition within the VITA definition of local development corporation. So, in other words, if they are set up to do property development. So we're not doing this to be exclusive, but we're also recognizing that not everyone's going to want to apply for this. Not all RDCs want to own property. You know, if another entity could come in on the behalf of whoever it is that wants to develop, we could consider it. But I think for our initial foray into this, I think we want to use the existing network that we have. I mean, some states leave it open to for-profit developers. We thought, no, let's just keep this within the nonprofit world. So, yeah, it's an approach. It's not the only, to your point. Like, is it the best? I don't know. But right now, this is what we have, and let's start with what we know and the network that we have. And VITA has a great program. They have a sub-3 program. It's just that currently, and some of our NBRC money that the RDCs do apply for, they need to come up with match. So we thought this would be a very good, versatile way to help meet that demand, you know, help catalyze development that otherwise it won't happen. You know, and then we make ourselves vulnerable by not having the available space.
So what has happened from the time that RDCs were doing it, and now they're not? What's the chance? I mean, Brattleboro's done it, NVDA has. We have 3 different industrial parks in the kingdom that NVDA put together. What's different now than what happened back then that they're not doing it?
Yeah, they're not doing it as much, and I think part of it is the patient money, like that. This is why we think the state has a role in trying to foment this, whereas they would just have to wait till they got the funding to, you know, that they either got the match for NBRC or that they raised the funding for the 10%. You know, and I can't speak to how it happened in the past, but in the past, you know, I know that GBIC created the whole, you know, development up in Essex, right? When IBM came to be, that was part of this whole VITA GBIC coming up with the funding to start that. Also their own industrial park, Brattleboro, there were a couple of really lean years when they didn't have tenants. So there's a fair amount of risk that the RDC takes to do this. And so I know when I was in a very lean GMEDC when I first got in, we could not even think about property ownership. So that's all I mean, that some people do, some people don't. This could be a catalyst for those who know how to do it, who want to do it, who have the support and the local kind of network to get it done.
So the deed restrictions, property sales, you talked about that the idea is that the RDCs get this property, they establish this property, and then at some point, if they sell it or if they refinance, then that grant money comes back into the fund. Is that's
yes, correct? That's the idea.
Not knowing completely how RDCs work, do they often sell the properties or do they tend to be landlords?
It's a mixed bag. So, you know, some want to own the property ad infinitum. In the case of industrial parks, because it's a great base, a great revenue base for them. But in the case of individual properties, like in the case of GMEDC, I know that they purchased one and they just sold it back to the tenant. And that happens again and again. And so for one-off properties, you know, I can't speak for them, but I doubt they're going to want to hold it forever.
But this is for industrial parks.
It's for industrial development. It doesn't have to be a park, right? We have no designation that's industrial park necessarily in the state, but there are a fair amount of examples where there's an industrial area, like there might be a block that has a few industrial sites, like on a Waterman Road, right? Like, it's not an industrial park, but it is where GW is in Royalton. So I didn't want it to be defined by that because it would be too restrictive and not be able to get to what we're trying to get at.
Yeah, my concern was that if those RDCs decided, if the majority of them decide to be landlords, then the grant money doesn't actually involve. It's just a payout to
Right.
RDCs and then we're done.
But I think probably that's where the grant comes in,
Well, yeah,
right?
yeah,
So it can be a grant, but it also could be turned into a revolving loan fund if the RDCs are buying property that's zoned industrial, putting up a building, turning around and selling it. They could be leasing it with option to buy. I think Joan's point is that they're needing patient money. That's not, they don't have to worry about making payments on, they don't have to worry about interest payments, that the money's there, and then eventually if there's a refinancing going on or if it winds up being sold, then the money then reverts back to the fund to go out again. So it's kind of like, I guess, state patience has to be there too.
Mr. Chair, I'm sorry.
No, that's fine.
I guess I'm just I just want to flag this for committee. So nonprofits do not typically pay property taxes if it's for direct and immediate use of a property. However, if it's remote or incidental, then they do, and that's according to my reading of 32 VSA 3802. And so I guess I'm a little concerned about if the property is sitting there under the ownership of an RDC, whether or not I guess I'm curious who is drafting this and if we could get input or testimony on how they would pay taxes on it, if at all, is my primary thrust of my concern.
I believe they do pay taxes.
They do. Yeah, they're 501c6s. So I think that what you're reading is in the context of a charitable organization.
Yes, it is. This is from the Department of Taxes.
Yeah, 501c3.
Okay.
Never get a community
To
agree.
I figured I was.
Industrial park within their bounds if they're putting these big buildings up and they're not paying any property tax on it.
Yeah.
Well, my employer works out of an industrial park and is a non-501c3, so I guess, yeah, I don't know, but you're right. I was just concerned about that. Thank you.
No, it's a good thing. I mean, we should be making sure that we're thinking about everything.
So then this is, again, new person question. I don't know all the ACCD programs, but would there be new staff required to do this? Is this something that current staff would be able to run? Is it folded into other programs, right, that are similar to this, or is this something completely brand new?
This is completely brand new. Having said that, we have a bunch of people working currently on the Community Recovery and Revitalization Program. That's not going to last forever. So we may be able to transition folks. We have about 6 limited service positions as a result of the ARPA money, transition folks to here. And I can't remember on the budget, but I think we did ask for the possibility of another position. I just would have to refresh. There was like a breakdown of how much we need in terms of program dollars and how much would be personal services. I think I asked for a position. I'm not sure. But it's going to depend on timing. We do think we'll be through the CRRP money before the end of the year, not fiscal year, the end of the calendar year. So we'll see. I mean, we're a pretty flexible organization. We take on a lot of new projects, and then the 6 limited service positions have been really, really helpful. And so I think we would continue with that. Yeah.
Sure.
So in terms of the program, when the transaction begins regarding the purchase of said industrial region and the process of the transaction starts moving forward and items such as property inspections begin, Is there a contingency with the state that the state also has their own property inspectors to investigate the property in addition to ones provided from the nonprofits?
So I have not gone that far, honestly, to know if that's something I'm going to do. I mean, maybe if we were going to be owner, perhaps, but typically there's going to need to be phase one and phase two environmental, depending on what other funding they're going to use for this. There may be even a larger environmental review.
Okay.
So it depends also if it's just property or if it's an actual building that they're going to purchase or they're going to build a building. So I think it's just going to depend on the situation.
Okay.
But yeah, I haven't contemplated that we're going to use our own inspectors and I haven't contemplated that, but.
Okay. I was just curious, especially with especially purchasing abilities, and you have the variabilities, lead paint, asbestos, buried oil tanks, contaminated soil.
Yeah, I mean, all of that we're very keen on because of our other hat with brownfields. So, no one's going to buy any property without having done a phase one. And the RDCs are very well versed in that, the ones who are involved in property. And if there is contamination, then, we would work toward trying to get that cleared up with the funding that hopefully we'll have for brownfields remediation.
Okay, perfect. Heather?
Just a part of the discussion, my understanding that in Vermont, we do a really good job of starting companies. And then we get them to a certain point and we sell them, right? Out of state, we do or they're moved. And in my small town, we've had several that's happened. I'm almost thinking that this could be helpful for those situations where instead of selling or going someplace, am I right?
No, that's exactly right.
Okay, so Green Mountain Salsa, Green Mountain whatever, who had 20-something employees in Chester, Vermont. That's a big deal. And they sold to someone else has sold to Kraft.
Right.
So from an economic development point of view, as a small business owner, I think that this could be a catalyst to help that, not just bring Canadians in. I'm originally Canadian and I love Canadians, but the thing is bring them down. But anyways, that's what I think would be really useful.
Absolutely.
And naive, maybe, like I'm new too, but Brownsfields, right? If it's cleaned up,
Right.
then perhaps an agency could come in and borrow some money
Correct.
to build something there.
Correct.
So it's also, from my point of view, if I'm thinking correctly, a long-term strategy for some of what we're doing in that area. Am I missing?
That's absolutely correct. I mean, in some regions like Springfield, there's a lot of brownfield and a lot of brownfield remediation. That has to happen before they could do anything on the soil. So, but it doesn't always have to be. But once they do the remediation, then they could contemplate something like this.
Something like this, and then we actually have a place for business.
A site ready.
To decide.
Exactly.
Okay, thank you.
That is the object.
Okay.
We'll call it the Catalyst Fund or something like that.
Question about the rural, using the rural index.
Oh, yeah.
So the rural index, I know it was developed for this earlier session for the help rural communities access grants. Through the ARPA fund grant.
Yes, it was the way of kind of just seeing the lay of the land, like, who's prospering, who's not, by a couple of different measures.
Yeah, so there's some, I guess my question is this, it's not a capitalized rural index, but is there a fixed rural index that we're using now? Because my impression was that it was sort of a work in progress. And I just by putting it in here, I'm wondering what that means.
Yes, thank you for asking that. Yeah, I think it's just a way of talking about how we might be able to prioritize if, let's say, you have equal projects, to the extent that you could ever have equal projects, but let's say you have comparable projects and one is in a community that has sort of negative grand list growth. The secretary here has given the secretary the option to designate that as a more of a priority than others. And we did that in community recovery. We had our prioritization was, we actually did it even broader than that. We said non-MSA communities. So outside of the Franklin, Chittenden and Grand Isle area got first priority. And we did also look at grand list growth, and most of the towns are stagnant or declining. So it's not that much of a differentiator, frankly, because there's very few that are actually above 1% growth. The index, we could use it. It's really a reference. It's not an eligibility criteria. So it's more of a prioritization or a preference.
I think there are gonna be people who are concerned about that. But when thinking about towns, maybe in my region, like we have towns that are so small, there's just no way they're ever going to be
Right.
citing anything. And to the rural index, when we were using it earlier for these grant process, I think we were saying the top 25 and then the top 50 or 60 towns on this rural index might get preference. But those are all super small towns.
Yeah,
And using the rural index, I don't even know if these small rural communities are the appropriate spot for some
right. May not be.
growth.
May not be. Yeah. I think it's really more of a reference point. So again, we're not expecting all of those communities would come forward for this. But if there's a project in a community that has, sort of insufficient growth, because there are a lot of communities on the index that you would think are doing swimmingly well, but aren't necessarily. And I know the index had a couple of different permutations. They had it wasn't just grand list growth, it was whether or not they had town staff. So it was really about measuring kind of capacity, do they have capacity? Mm-hmm. And I think for this purpose, it's a little bit different because we're not necessarily working directly with the town and having the town apply. It's really the RDC. They're going to apply just that the project happens to be in a particular town that really needs it, right? So it's just it's a guide. I don't think it's an eligibility, but
I guess
I hear you. I know there was a lot of discussion about.
So I think this number 2 C2 might be fine, just ending that sentence after grand list growth.
Okay. I think we'll probably be fine with that. Yeah.
I also feel like there are towns that are experiencing some economic growth, and it would certainly be nice to continue that
Correct.
on. So I would hate to
Right.
say, I'm sorry, because you've experienced 1% growth, you don't get, you're out of the game here.
Right.
And that would be a shame too.
Yeah, it would be. I guess it's really more of a comparative rather than absolute. So it's if we have, let's say, 4 projects coming in and we don't have enough money, let's just say 4 or 5 projects, I don't know how many we'll be able to fund depending on whether we're, assisting to buy property or whether we're assisting with down payment. It's going to depend on the variety of things that come in, but it would just be a way of being able to determine, okay, which one is this?
I understand.
It's going to be tough.
You need a criteria.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
Well, and you could say insufficient or limited economic growth. That would, then if you have a community that is showing some economic growth, this would help boost. Then, but I agree, if you put that rural index in there, you might as well take it out.
Yes, please.
I don't see, I really don't see the need for any rural index in here. Not the communities it's not the capacity of the communities.
Okay, little different context.
Yeah. Just so everyone knows, so here, we're looking at eligibility applicants. We talk about the local development corporation. But if you look in the statute, it actually names RDC as can be a local development corporation. Because when I first read that and I looked, I said, what the heck is a local development corporation? I don't ever remember hearing that, but in the statute.
It's there, yeah.
Okay.
Did you want to,
Any other questions on this piece? The ask is 10 million, right?
yes, that's correct.
So worst case scenario, fund 10 projects.
Yeah, or more if it's,
Right.
the project cost is less, yeah, yeah. Which we're actually finding on CRRP, not everyone's coming in with the $1 million ask, so.
Okay. We also have revitalization.
Yeah, a technical correction, okay. I think that takes care of it. It's mainly with these water districts that aren't necessarily municipality, but they
They're their own-
serve the municipality and they could be a private company. I mean, it's,
Okay, it's a private, it's not the because a
Well-
fire district is a municipality.
Right.
Under the law.
and in some cases that is fine. And in some cases, it's not so clear that it's a true district. Like we have a few that are like water boards that are just like technically a private company, but it serves the municipality. So we want them to be able to qualify under the municipality. So I don't know if I think this takes care of it, but that was a technical correction, just to make sure we're not doing anything wrong. The brownfields, yeah, the notwithstanding language, we would still need it. That's how I testified in Energy and Environment, because even if they move the cap up to 500,000, it means we cannot fund some of these larger, really dirty projects that would cost $1 million. So,
Yeah, so what we need to do is repeat the language that we have in BA.
correct.
Right?
Yep. That's our ask.
We need to make the changes that Energy and Environment have
Put in, right,
upping
the cap.
the cap and, okay, yeah. Now,
There was something else.
and the other one is the relocation grants
Okay, yes, and I was just looking
here.
for it. So the relocation grant, the intent last year was that we were going to create a system where we pre-approve people before they leave their state. The problem was the way it was written, it looked like you had to have moved here after July 1st, 2021. So we couldn't get around that, and we had to fund people who are already here. Not ideal. So we'd like to get rid of the date, but the way it reads right now, it looks like it's open to anybody who's moved here. So we need to put some language in there, and we'll send something to you, but we need to put something in there that basically states the applicant would have had to have been pre-approved before their move. But written much nicer than what I just said, but that's the,
Not sure, David.
I don't see
I don't think he has that yet.
oh, he took it out. Maybe I saw it in last night and then this changed, right?
Well, I think the language, I sent David the language that just sent.
That we sent, right. And we overlooked that.
That in there, so
It just needs to be like clear that it's only for people who are,
it's a new program, right? Every time we've done.
every time we do it, it's new. Yeah,
So it almost seemed like it reverted to the old program.
it did. All right, now it kind of looks like it's out of here anyway, so. I don't know, it changed. Yeah, I don't see it in this morning's. I saw it in last night. And I saw project-based TIF. I don't see it in this one. Is that somewhere else?
No. So
It's nowhere?
it's
Senate.
my understanding that the Senate is going to
Right.
take it up. I've spoke with Chair
Right,
Cummings. So we're waiting for that to come over.
okay,
So we're hoping, and maybe you want to talk to her too,
yeah,
but I think it's an interest that we may have different thought than what we talked about the last couple of years,
right,
that I think could be beneficial to all communities
okay,
to do one project instead of doing a whole full blown
Right.
shift. I
right,
think it'd be advantageous to everybody,
good.
I think.
Yeah, I'm glad that you think that, and thank you.
The rest of the committee, whether or not the other committee thinks that, I don't know. But I think it makes a lot of sense.
That's great.
Okay,
Well, thank you very much. If you have nothing else,
is there anything else that
good.
we need to talk to Joan about?
Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Thanks, Joan. I don't have anybody scheduled now until 3:30. Fred and Adam are here, okay, good. Good afternoon, Fred, good afternoon, Adam.
Hello. Hello.
So we just been chatting with Joan about the rural, find the program here.
Rural Industry Development Grant Program. So I guess we settled on a name, huh?
Oh, you know what we didn't talk about, Joan? This Rural Business Technical Assistance Exchange Appropriation.
The RDCs.
It's a sub-grant to provide services and through the Rural Business Technical Assistance.
Yeah, RDCs.
Can you, the program that was under.
Early BTA.
Right. COVID,
Okay,
the business navigator,
Where'd that come
hub and spoke. Ah.
didn't come through.
No, it didn't come.
It's not in the budget. That's an RDC proposal.
I was, okay, thank you. Too many things running around here.
Language from.
I thought it did come up in the.
Okay, the RDCs. That's, yeah. Navigators. Gotcha. Okay. So why don't we start with that and then we'll go on to the.
Okay. You want me to start with the
Yeah, so that's
exchange? Okay.
section 28, yeah.
Yeah, sure. So for the record, Fred Kenny, Executive Director, Addison County Economic Development Corporation, and also President of the RDCs of Vermont. And I think with me is Adam Grenold from BDCC as well. So yeah, I was in a few weeks ago and talking about the budget items, but then we also gave you a copy of our proposal on a rural business technical assistance program that seeks to continue a program that we set up on using CARES Act funding that was awarded to the RDCs, and we set up what became an award-winning program to provide technical assistance to very small and small businesses through technical assistance providers, vendors. So we stood up the program, and it was originally funded with CARES Act money. Then when ARPA passed, SBA started a program called the Community Navigator Program, where they had a hub and spoke system where Vermont SBDC was the hub, and there were several spokes, and the RDCs were one of the spokes, providing technical assistance to small businesses. And essentially, we just continued that program because we had already set up this pool of experts in various areas like CPAs, lawyers, and other, hold on just a second. Come on.
Oh, it's HD 67.
Yeah, so we already had a pool of CPAs, lawyers, architects, engineers, marketing professionals, videographers, and website designers. So we were able to continue that program under the SBA funded program. And of course, both of those have ended now, but if in the documents we sent you, you can see that it was very successful. It served a total of about 800 to 900 businesses as both clients and as Vermont companies with the vendors as well. And, we were able to help very small businesses make changes to their business to pivot after and during COVID. Design new websites, get videographers in to provide videos for their website, set up online shopping on their websites, design marketing plans, change their organizations or their premises to better meet the requirements of post-COVID business. So lots of different things. The grants were an average of $3,000 to $4,000. But so what the RDCs did is through those programs, which helped us fund capacity, we had navigators that matched small businesses to the pool of professional technical assistance providers that were in our system, then designed a scope of work along with the client and the vendor. And then the vendor did the work, and the money that was made available through those programs for the grants were paid to the vendors to the benefit of the clients that got the work done. So what we're proposing is that we, have the ability to continue that program where we would, it continues, as I think a couple of you said, it's kind of what the RDCs do anyway, but this goes beyond what we do in our normal day-to-day operations, where one of the things we do very well is make referrals to resources. But what this does is help us match clients that need a specific technical assistance resource with the providers that can provide that in this pool that we've already got built. So it takes advantage of an asset that ARPA and CARES money helped develop. And then we need a little of the funding to administer the program, a little bit to have I think during those programs, we had 10 navigators around the state. Under our proposal, I think we would have 6. They'd have bigger regions to handle. So that capacity, but mostly it's the grant money. We don't have grant money sitting around in our normal operations to provide grants like these. So that's really what it's for, is to match small businesses to technical assistance providers and provide that grant to make that change happen in their business that will help them go forward post-COVID. So that's in short what the proposal is. And I saw that you very appreciative that you put the language in this committee bill, and you have $1.5 million in there as an appropriation. So we really appreciate that, and we hope that we can continue helping these very small businesses with this program. Our intention is to expand the focus of this, to rural areas and underserved populations around Vermont. Adam, I don't know if you want to add anything on this or not.
No, I think you covered that very nicely.
Questions?
I guess I just looked back and it was 1.25 last year. So this is a $250,000 increase. I'm doing that.
There's no previous appropriation for this program.
This is
Who cares? But the report that you gave us.
Oh, that would have been a couple
years
ago. It would have been 2020 probably.
Yeah. 2023 Rural Business Technical Assistance Exchange. Isn't this continuing that?
It is, but there was no state funding.
Correct.
There was no state funding for that.
Correct. But the amount of money. Okay.
I'd have to look back to see what we got under CARES Act through ACCD and then under the SBA program. But yeah, it's around our request was 1.250.
This is 1.5. This is more in this bill.
I was surprised to see 1.5 in the bill, but very appreciative.
Must be from that.
From that bill?
He doesn't have to say.
Yeah.
I think I'm also just because we had, when we did our budget thing on Friday, we had 1,250,000.
Yeah. It could very well been it could have been my error, and I was putting.
Oh, so it could be a duplicate. And so I'm like, it seems like a duplicate of the spreadsheet we sent to appropriations last week, because we,
Yes.
Okay.
Should be, yeah.
Okay.
That's where-
okay, all right, okay.
So, and that or this?
It looks like what
It's
was,
the same thing, just different money amounts? Okay,
Think-
Yeah, I think your spreadsheet had 1.250 for this
yeah,
program.
okay.
Put it at 1.25.
Yeah.
okay.
Sounds like a drafting error.
Yeah.
And I guess I just looked at the math from what you sent us. It looks like you spent 1.2 in the 23, not Vermont money, right? The money that came from CARES. So I was just trying to get an understanding of how many businesses would be supported and all of that. So that's what my brain was trying to understand.
Yeah, and that's what we used to come up with the amount that we asked for, was to help a similar number of businesses with this program. So it'd be about, depending on the grant size, and it can vary. With that amount, we can do about 400 to 500 businesses. Provide grants to that many.
I've just got some technical questions, and maybe this was discussed last time and I've kind of forgotten. So the exchange, is that that database of resources, is that a common thing that the Rural Development Corporation of Vermont as a whole has, and then each RDC works through that? And
Something like that, yeah. When we first started the program, all the RDCs were charged to find vendors in various sectors that might help with this program and steer them to a common URL that the RDCs of Vermont created. Happens to be in Adam's shop, but it's available. The database that was created out of that is available to all the RDCs, and actually is public. It's open to the public. You can go on there and search it if you want. I'll let Adam give you the URL name. I can't remember it off. It's like Vermont.
Economicdevelopment.com.
Yeah, that's right. Economicdevelopment.com. And so, yeah, all the RDCs helped steer vendors to the site to sign up. They were vetted by several navigators, and then that set the who was going to be available within the pool of technical assistance providers. And then we continued that under the SBA program, added more to it, opened it up for more people to join as vendors. And we'll do that again if we are refunded. Yeah, so that's how it came about, and it's there and available for us to use.
Is the money, the whatever number it got decided will be appropriated, is that divided again amongst all the RDCs? And is it proportional? Is it just divided by 16 or whatever? And they, how does that, or is it a common body that gives those grants of up to 5,000? How's that?
We're going to probably model it on the way we did it under the SBA program, which was there was one amount of money that went to the RDC that hosts the system that we use, that we set up to track the vendors, track the clients, track the scopes of work. So that's one piece of administrative funding that we would have that would go to whichever RDC is hosting that. Right now it's at BDCC. Then where the plan for this money is to have 6 navigators that handle, larger than, they'll handle like 2 RDC areas. So it'd be equitably distributed among 6 RDCs to have staff that would help do the navigating, help find the clients. So all the RDCs would steer clients to the navigator in their region. The navigator matches them with the appropriate vendor, helps the vendor and the client write a scope of work, and then follows that scope of work through the process till the vendor gets paid.
And the vendor gets paid from the funds that have been divided up into those pools of 6, that the navigators, or how?
They'll just be one fund with all the funds for the whole state.
Okay.
Yeah.
Question. Fred, so a couple of things one of the things I liked about this program during the pandemic was that the RDCs are reaching out to not just larger corporations, but to small businesses. I like to see, I thought that was great for our growth of our small businesses. I wanted to make sure that this is sort of a good closed loop, that we're using state funds to help these small businesses and using other businesses that are located in Vermont to help to grow our small businesses, but then not use our other small businesses or other business as resources to help them. That's, as I recall, that's what we did during the pandemic, correct?
Yes, the available list of vendors are all Vermont companies.
Okay.
And I just, RDCs, there's this perception that RDCs only deal with big companies. I have, one company with more than 500 employees in Addison County. We all deal with all kinds of sizes of companies. It is true that during the pandemic, we all took on many very small clients to help them understand what's available, help them understand how to apply to all the programs that were available, which one's right for you, because the SBDC couldn't handle everybody. So we all stepped up and we're interfacing with every size company in our region. But it's really been true since we've all existed. True that some of us have own property and it's industrial property. So you're dealing with a larger company with more employees, but we really all have clients that are from every size, sector, background and it's really different by each region. Obviously I deal with a lot more agricultural value add because this is Addison County. So I just want to kind of push back a little on that perception that RDCs only deal with big companies, because it's we work with clients of all ilks, if that's a word, ilk.
Well, you're also only so big that you only have so many.
Yeah,
people.
we only have just so much capacity. And what's been nice about these, the CARES Act and then the ARPA funding is that it's helped us to bring on, some extra people and expand our capacity to help reach out more to all size businesses. Looks like Adam was going to add something.
Yeah, I just wanted to help everybody understand two things. Because those dollars were centralized, they were for the entire state, and all the RDCs were working to deploy those in their region. Some regions just were able to get that message out faster or more effectively, and we flexed. So we didn't let all the dollars go to those regions that were getting that message out. We just made sure that we paused, held it. So again, I would envision a similar approach that would ensure that the dollars were distributed across the state. I'll drop into the chat a little map that shows you very visually where all the dollars went. And that's a great resource to understand the coverage that had.
It'd be better to email it to Andrew. We don't use the chat.
Yeah, right. Sorry.
Other questions? Where did the language that's in here?
It's
367 that Laura, Representative Sibilia put together.
Yes, we provided it to the Rural Caucus and they included it in their rural omnibus bill. Okay. And I think there's a separate bill too, yeah.
When I'm looking at it, so we keep talking about rural areas of Vermont. What do we mean by rural areas of Vermont?
And I don't think this program would only go to rural areas. We're just going to try to focus on those areas and those populations. And that's how the SBA program was run.
Yeah.
Just made, an effort to reach out to those communities and populations that weren't typically taking advantage of state programs.
But I guess when I look at, so it says, when looking at the eligibility, to receive technical assistance through the exchange of business must be a for-profit entity located in a rural area of Vermont. And so I just, I want to understand how you look at what a rural area of Vermont is.
Well, with the federal programs we deal with, every place in Vermont is rural except for the Burlington LMA.
Okay. And so within Chittenden County, outside of Burlington, all other communities, all businesses within those other communities would be eligible?
Yes. And if you want that, the program to be utilized in Chittenden County, we can take that word out.
Well, but are we talking Burlington is the LMA or Chittenden County is the LMA?
It's the Franklin Chittenden County metropolitan area.
So they would not, so any businesses in Franklin or Chittenden County would not be eligible?
If that word is left in there, that's a potential, yes.
Okay. And
I
then
mean, some federal programs everywhere in Vermont is rural.
Right.
It really depends on what definition you use, and maybe, if you want to limit it, maybe we should add a definition in there.
Fred, that came from the rural caucus, that language.
Yeah. I think that's why that was in there, because that bill is the one that was, the original bill was introduced at the rural caucus. So they were trying to focus programs to rural areas only.
But the last program, the last year has not been limited. Is that correct?
That's right. The SBA program and the CARES Act, REVTA, we called it REVTA, Restart Vermont. Those were not limited. Those went all over the state.
Well, and is your recommendation to have it limited?
I think that would depend on, how much the appropriation ends up being. If there's enough to spread it around the whole state, we could do something else in the bill to limit how much goes to one area, like you're doing with some of the other programs you talked about today. But if you, it's really up to the committee. If you'd like it to be limited, then include some language that limits it to certain areas of Vermont.
When the previous iteration of this was for statewide, the majority of the dollars were they spent in Franklin Chittenden?
I'd have to go back and look at the numbers, but it was pretty evenly spread from the Northwest, Central Vermont down to Adams area. Those three regions in both iterations, REVTA and then the SBA were able to get more of the money out, but every region of the state got some of the grants.
But I guess where the other regions of the state that I think about as being rural would be my area. Where did they have businesses that needed the help that couldn't get it because the money wasn't there to help?
No, because like Adam said, we didn't let all the money go out to Chittenden County only. We held some back and just made sure that businesses that needed it, that applied, from those regions got a grant. And then as that happened, then we let more go to Brattleboro and Central Vermont.
Maybe if we had, instead of talking about rural areas of Vermont, just say priority will be given to entities located in rural areas of Vermont for time certain, and then you can look at, I mean, I just hate to provide state tax dollars and not allow businesses that need the help, even if they're in, you know, Chittenden or Franklin County, the ability to get that assistance if they need it. I mean, I think we want to make sure that all businesses, if they need technical assistance, get technical assistance. And,
right.
and
we would support that.
I get the rule where the rural caucus is coming from, but in the same breath, we have to realize that our economic engine sits in certain places of the state, and we need to make sure that engine keeps revving.
Yeah, absolutely.
Also, one of the other criteria talks about a business whose owner's income is higher than the federal labor market area which a business operates shall provide 50% match. But what happens if it's a corporation? The business owner may not be showing much of a profit, but the business certainly does. So I'm just thinking of a different way of, you know, looking at that. We want to make sure the business has the ability to pay something or pay for part of it, should pay for part of it.
Yeah. And that is a change. The REVTA program and neither the REVTA program nor the SVA program required a match. They just got the grant. But we just thought, because like you're saying, this is state taxpayer dollars, that if a business is owned by someone who has some resources, you know, let's ensure that we can do more grants, because some of the businesses that have resources, or the owners do, are putting, you know, if the project's going to cost $5,000, they would have to put up $2,500. Do a 50% match. That's the intention of that. The language might not be eloquent or elegant, but that, yeah, if we have some language that you know, meets that end goal, then we're fine with that.
Well, maybe it could be that everyone would have to provide 50% match unless they can provide evidence that the business is struggling, can't afford to, something to that effect. But does that put more pressure on how you have to look at it?
Yeah, that means we have to come up with some kind of way to judge that. It's probably doable. It makes it a little harder to administer, but.
Mr. Chair, if I may, I would advocate for removing any match requirements. I shared with the committee by email an article on the inequities inherent to governmental funding and match requirements. It creates more problems than it solves frequently, but I know that's for committee discussion, but it makes it more challenging for those reviewing the applications.
I'm just thinking about our folks downstairs. We're looking at a business that could provide their own assistance or partial to noodle on that, I think.
Just the way that this is written now is like, I would think that in order to show that the owner's income is higher than the federal labor market area, you have to look for income tax returns, because often business owners pay themselves a very small salary so that they can pay their employees. And that's, I think this adds a complication as well, so.
I got it.
Right, yeah, I think it's just, could be you maybe need to find a more simplistic way to figure this out and provide some match.
Simple way is not required.
I think the system that we have set up because it was partially funded, we got SBA money, but in order to provide more grants, the state had some CDBG money that was it was ARPA funded, but it was through CDBG. So because of that, we had to income sensitize the program for people that were getting money from CDBG. So if people applied and they met that income sensitivity, which is built into the application already, then we could use CDBG money. So that we can just continue that.
And Fred, that was a self-attestation.
And it was just a self-attestation. It wasn't, we didn't check any personal income tax returns or anything.
We had tried that in the previous program and it became too complex. So we worked it out with the state where this attestation was agreeable.
Okay, I think we could probably do something like that now. If information were to come to you that would say that a business was not entirely truthful in that attestation, then what would the remedy be?
There was clawback language in the grant agreement.
Okay. And you could continue to provide that as well. Okay. Okay. Any other questions?
Something Adam just said just reminded me of another kind of a benefit of continuing this program is so many elements of it are already set up. The pool of experts, the systems already in place to kind of track the scope of work and vet the potential vendors. So many things are already in place that it's not like we're reinventing a program. It's there. We're just trying to keep it going. And it's been a very successful program. So keep that going. Thank you.
Well, it certainly saves on startup costs. Okay. Let's go to the Rural Industrial Development Grant Program that Joan had outlined, and we've gone through that with her. One of the questions that I had is, RDCs have done this before. They've, gone the speculative route and purchased property, had industrial parks. That's, we haven't seen too much of that going on lately. There's a need for it. Why can't we continue to go through the same path that we've used before? Why are we looking at doing something like this?
So for us, ACEDC hasn't, it's been a long time since we developed the building. We bought the land and built the building for bow ties when they established a new expanded operation here in Middlebury. That was a long time ago, and it hasn't happened since. And I think one of the reasons is what Joan brought up. There are less available patient money. Secondly, I think back then VITA was more amenable to more risky and speculative undertakings than they are now. They're less likely to, do the sub-3 program for an RDC unless you have a tenant ready to go. So that, that kind of makes it their current sub-3 thinking kind of a companion to this program, because readiness is one of the elements that's in the application. So I'm going to let Adam address this as well, please.
Great. Adam Grinold, Executive Director of the BDCC, for the record. So in that conversation with Joan, I made some notes and around the sub-3 piece of this and how RDCs used to do this is you could do speculative development. And this happened in the 80s, maybe early 90s. And as the historians tell it, that a few didn't go well, and VITA backed off and now requires a project company to be in line for those sub threes. So we can't just go utilize the sub three program, purchase a vacant building, and wait for someone to move in. So the sub three program is great. I work primarily out of the Brattleboro and Bellows Falls for a lot of our industrial work. I live in Wilmington. We have where GS Precision actually started in Wilmington. It's now a vacant building. We have a small manufacturer that's looking to acquire the building under a sub three. BDCC looks at the building and says, that's a lot of risk. They would be able to pay the rent, but if for some reason that company didn't succeed, we would then be the owner of that building under the sub three, at risk with nobody being able to pay us for that. So when we look at both the condition of the building and the required capital reserves to put back into some years of depreciation without investment, for us, the deal doesn't make sense. We really want to help this small manufacturer in a part of the county that doesn't typically see manufacturing employment, and are really trying to find a way to make this project work. And in this example, acquisition is under $1 million. So the project between the project company, the sub three, and a program like this, you close that gap. Now the deal makes sense. Now we as an RDC are willing to take that risk, own the building. Project company is paying triple net all the costs. All of those payments go into a fund that they can at any point take the option to buy the building for us at the original debt. There's no profit in this for the RDC. We're just holding that and acting not quite as a bank, but it's more complicated and more of a partnership. But it allows that company to focus on their growth, their employees, training their folks up, and doing that to get that business going. So that's a great example of a smaller place outside of sort of the traditional industrial. Another example that we're currently working with is to acquire a vacant parcel. There's very limited industrial zone flat land left in the region. Our biggest fear in our area is because of our proximity to the Interstate 91 and the tri-state location, is that this land will be purchased by large corporations and utilized as warehouse space. So for us, there would be nothing worse for our economic development than taking large portions of our remaining flat land and dedicating it to buildings that have few jobs, that are not high paying, they're not high wage, not high growth, and very low skill. So we want to ensure that, one, we can capture that space. Two, for this particular firm, they have been in the region for many years. They were purchased by an investor group. The investor group has also purchased other businesses in neighboring states, and they're now very much looking to assess, do they do that growth here or do they do the growth elsewhere? If we had this land, we could shave 1.5 years off of the timeline. 1.5 years is really what this means for us. We would have had done pre-permitting. We would have done maybe some conceptual design. So that work could be ready and the company could come and say, we would like to build this 60,000 square foot space. We understand you have this land. Yes, we build it. Maybe they want to own it. We just sell them everything. They go ahead and build it. Some scenarios, maybe they want us to build it, lease it for a short period of time under a sub 3, and then buy it back. So there's a few different scenarios there where this program would provide significant economic boost for now, but for years to come through that program. One other scenario is just if there's an existing building to purchase, similar to the one I described in Wilmington. We've identified a facility that is not on the market that we could purchase in support of one business. They can only take up about 1/3 of the building. So again, it's too much for us to risk taking when we can only fill it with 1/3. But if we could have a program like this who could help mitigate, shrink that risk and that gap, we would be able to do it. Lastly, just in the last year alone, we've had 200,000 square feet of requests for space in our region that don't exist. We have less than 3% vacancy rate in our industrial space. And we need to create more space for tomorrow's employers. So really excited that this is being considered and happy to answer any questions.
Thanks, Adam. One thing I wanted to add was that, we appreciate the flexibility that's in the language right now. There's flexibility around what you can use the funding for. And that's very helpful because as you hear, there's the circumstances vary by region where here in Addison County, we don't have very little existing industrial space available, but we have parcels. So what this would allow us to do is to work with the private owners of those parcels to get them pre-permitted, maybe get infrastructure developed. So like Adam said, we're ready if one of our businesses here are looking to expand or the circumstances where there are businesses looking to come into Vermont, like those Canadian companies. Here, I would love to, this program would also help us maybe develop a small business incubator center. We get students coming out of Middlebury College looking for a little bit of space to start their business, and we have none here. So that, that's another way that this could be used.
I'm thinking out loud here. Are there any concerns with the state allocating money to the RDCs using general fund dollars, which are then purchasing property and then selling that property to a private entity? What if the private entity were to draw down like block grant monies or, I don't know, any other state or federal dollars to purchase the land or develop the property in any way? Are there any concerns with double dipping or anything like that I'm just trying to think out loud here? Is that a potential issue?
I kind of like Jones, or I forget who brought up, to call this a catalyst fund, because really, this might be used to pre-permit, to pre-infrastructure, to get parcels ready or buildings ready. We and maybe the company, if there's, or nonprofit that's involved, are going to be accessing other programs to make the project happen. This is going to get, catalyze the project, get it going, allow for the development to happen, other resources. And I'll let Adam can talk about all the resources. He's used them so many times, but they're going to have to be other resources brought to bear, CDBG and others, to make projects happen, actually.
So that's on your end. Sorry. And so that would be state dollars matching state dollars in some instances?
Or probably more likely federal dollars.
Yeah, but I can appreciate I think the question is, we don't want to necessarily, without knowing, double dip into one company for this, because this is supposed to revolve. So if in the scenario I just gave, where this company was able to do that 60,000 new foot construction, we would definitely absolutely need other programs to make it affordable, just because the cost to construct is so big. But if we use this program to buy that land, the land would be part of that sources and uses. So the value that we bought the land for and sold the land for would go back to the state in that scenario, whether it was immediately or in the future, depending on the structure of that project. In the scenario where we're looking to take a building, lease it over a period of time, I think that building could also see other funding sources. We would just want to make it clear that the investment from this program was always tracked as a source to be either repaid or at the time of resale.
If this were a more defined revolving loan fund with a 20-year or something limit to it, what kind of hindrances would that cause you? Or would it?
That is already available. The projects cost so much that depending if you're talking
low interest or no interest, I mean something more,
Yeah, and a no interest is good as a grant until you owe it, and if you don't owe it until you sell it, I think that's fine. I don't see an issue when I think about that scenario.
Okay.
Uh,
I think, yeah, it seems like that's the kind of scenario this is built out to be, but not sure, call it a grant program until you sell the property, and then it goes into a revolving fund, I guess. And then I think there's a clause in there that also says may also require a percentage of the sales profit. So then that becomes an equity position. So we got grants and loans and equity position all rolled into one, I guess.
Brad, I don't want to speak for the whole group here, but I think, from my experience, what's so valuable about this is that initial upfront patient capital. The various vehicles and how it's designed in regards to grant, debt, equity, those things I think could all be to the plus for the state. And as long as it doesn't add complexity to the upfront patient part of it.
Maybe that's what we need to call it, is patient equity, and not a grant, but.
Although use the term equity kind of means that the state expects to get something back every time. You expect a return.
Well, anytime an investor takes an equity position, they expect it, but it's not guaranteed.
There's a risk. Yeah.
Yep. The state would be taking on a big risk that VITA is not willing to take on that risk, I think. Okay.
I wanted to just address, maybe if I could share, work out a couple of items I heard during discussion. RDCs do pay taxes, so the properties, just to ensure that these properties are all on the tax rolls. I think one of the real benefits to this could be strengthening some of the RDCs. So the question is, do all RDCs have the strength to do this? And the RDCs of Vermont network can support RDCs in a region that may not have the technical ability to do this, but are willing to step into that role. So this could really bring the technical assistance of the whole to regions where it may not exist, strengthening that RDC and that local economy, using this as a vehicle to create a new space that wouldn't exist otherwise. That has either ownership by the RDC or eventually the company, really continuing to strengthen both the economy and the RDCs.
Yeah, I'll just add to that I succeeded Adam as president, and under his leadership and then mine, we've really tried to build the capacity of the RDCs as a group, so that if, that started with the Department of Labor conferences that we did over 2 years, and then running the RevTA and then the SBA program, but other ways as well, like professional development, just making sure that if a particular RDC doesn't have the capacity in-house to do something, the capacity is there among the team, the whole group, to help them with that. And I think that's one of the ways we could address that concern that some of the RDCs, not all the RDCs own property, but those that need a little bit of help, if they were trying to utilize this program, the whole team is there to back them up on that and help them with it.
Very
could encourage further development in areas of the state that we're not seeing yet.
Yeah, especially in the brownfields area. So a little known benefit of the RDCs is that we're able to acquire property in Vermont outside of the chain of liability. So if there is a project that's not, it's not terrible, there's some known wrecks, and no one else is going to step into that exposure, RDCs can step in to purchase, do a cleanup. They're responsible for anything that occurs when they own it, but they're not in the chain of liability going back, so they can bring in some outside state or federal resources to do that cleanup, repurpose that, get a certificate of completion on the project in partnership with DEC and EPA, and then be able to repurpose that property.
Any other questions? Okay, great. Thank you both for taking the time to be with us this afternoon.
Our pleasure. Just want to again thank you for including our funding request in your letter to the Appropriations Committee, and for considering these important programs in this bill. Very much appreciate that.
Thank you. Now Julia's here.
5 minutes.
Yeah, so we need to take a 5-minute break. We've been going since 1 o'clock.